Welcome back to Tim's Garage. I'm Tim, and you got it. This isn't my garage again. We're working back on the Cayenne, doing the timing chain. If you haven't seen part one, take a look at that. That's going to help you get to this point. These valve covers are on here with one bolt to keep the dust and stuff off. We got the car pushed back in. I'm going to pull the parts and stuff out of the back of the car, and I'm going to show you all the parts that you're going to need for this job and what you might need for your job and how to do this. All right, let's get at it. Let me start this part 2 by saying thank you to everyone for waiting over a year for this upload. Life has a tendency to take you to places you don't really expect. Long story short, I packed up my family and my garage and moved everything from Maryland to Colorado for health reasons for my son. If you wish to know more, please comment below and I'll end up making a video about everything. But now, let's get to the part that everyone has been waiting for, and I had been stressing the most, fixing the issues I had at the end of part 1, and assembling everything, and cross your fingers, she starts. Well, this is what happens when you put things off. I lost the audio for this one. More so, the audio is actually been messed up. So I'm just going to voice over on this. So let me talk to you about the tools that you need, like I said in part 1. Right off the bat, don't bother. If you have a 955 with a V8 port side injected engine, you do not need to buy either of these toolkits. All you need from these kits is a harmonic balancer lockout pin, a cam lockout bars, and a 27mm socket or a 1 1/16 socket. Forget everything else. Let me explain. You can use a drill bit for the lockout pin, but you need this anyways, see part 1. You also need some flat stock steel from Lowe's or Home Depot, and you need this later to counterhold the crankshaft the way I did it. And of course, the socket. These engines do not use cam saddles from these kits. If you're clever enough to do this job, you can make things work for these tools. I got the cheap eBay kit for $100 and the larger kit from Amazon for $500 on sale. Both were completely useless, but I had it, so I used some of the parts. If you have the 957 or the V6, you could use some of them, but I can't speak exactly for those engines as I haven't ever done a timing chain on them. I ended up keeping the cheap kit because, well, it was past the return date on eBay and I'm a tool whore, so whatever, no big deal. But I did sell the Amazon kit on eBay, minus the shipping that I spent for it initially. Besides, the chain tensioner needs to be replaced when you do this job. It falls apart and is trash when you take it out. As long as you rotate things clockwise, you'll be fine. You have to reset the timing anyways. The tensioner tool will not fit the 955, as you can see here in this clip, which is why I ended up having 2 sets in the end. At least I was able to sell one. Let my lessons save you money. So this is what I came up with to take off the bolt on the passenger side rear lower part of the valve cover assembly. It's basically impossible to get to with anything bigger than this. This is just a 1/4-inch Torx bit on a 1/4-inch wrench with a magnet holding it in place. You can get these ratchets for this. They're like $6 or $7 at Harbor Freight, but I didn't have one and I wanted to get the job done with what I had on site. Besides, remember, this is at a friend's garage. So I'm working with his tools and some of my tools. So yeah, you do what you gotta do. All right, let's go over what parts you need and why. So if you wanted to replace everything in here, you're gonna spend more than what this car is actually worth. This car's worth about $6 to $7 grand, and I priced everything out on the cheap. And these alone are almost $700 for this guy. Another $7 for this. Full timing kit for like $1 grand comes with these sprockets and the crank sprocket and the crank chain and everything you need. And then there's some gaskets and other stuff you need. There's other parts in here that this sprocket alone is close to $220 for these. So why am I not changing these out? Okay, all the timing kits you can find only come with, the full timing kits, right? Come with the crank sprocket, this sprocket, the chain, the guides, and all that stuff. You still, some of them come with gaskets and whatnot, no big deal. Why wouldn't they come with these? Why wouldn't they change this and pull this off? Well, I've been advised by people who have done this before, do not take these apart. Okay? I'm not saying don't loosen this up when you do the timing, because you have to. Don't try and take this off this sprocket or open it up or clean it or anything. Leave it the heck alone. Unless teeth are missing or they are very badly worn. You can see these are not worn very bad at all. That's very typical wear. See, you can still see the hardening color right there. And on the crank, let's see if we can see how there's just a little bit of wear. It's not the whole thing is smooth. There's a little bit of a what do you call, like a satin finish, kind of like, right? So you can focus a little bit. There you go. It's kind of a little bit of a satin finish, and then you see the really shiny part where it's worn. Well, this is showing you that this sprocket is nowhere close to the end of its life. In fact, that's very, very nice normal wear. So the only reason you would change out, come on, focus, there we go. The only reason you would change out any of these sprockets is if they're broken. Now, school number one argument is the chain wears and the sprockets wear at the same rate. That's not true. On motorcycle chains and stuff like that, that is absolutely true. One will wear down the other faster if you don't replace it. On this situation, we're only talking about 100 to 150,000 miles that you're going to end up having to do this in this car. The fact that this has gone 120,000 miles is testament to that it's fine, okay? Everyone's kind of all said the same thing, that don't replace it unless it's broken or obvious signs of wear. So I'm not replacing these sprockets at all. I'm going to leave them alone. Now, the only reason why you would change the timing chain, the oil pump chain, is either the oil pump sprocket or this sprocket needs to be replaced. And I'm just kind of, you can't really look down there and see anything. So I'm not going to change it. I'm going to kind of take that gamble. I think it's a very good gamble to take. I think the odds of it of being fine is fine. From what I've heard is with this guide installed, okay, and this guide installed and the tension made on that spring, just touch that chain. If there's any wiggle room on that, that means that either the guide is completely shot or this chain is completely shot. And let me tell you, if any part of these teeth come off, there's a pretty good chance that the rest of these are kind of messed up. And I would absolutely replace this if any of these teeth were messed up or the wear was wrong on it. In fact, I'd probably just swap out the engine at that point. But on this engine, the gears look great, or the sprockets look great. And I don't see any reason to change anything in here. So timing chain and the guides and gaskets and pretty much everything else around this. Now, one thing that people do change is the water pump, because it is pretty dang easy to change this out. It's only going to take me just a few minutes to change that out. That's not why I'm going to change it out. If you grab a hold of this, probably not going to be able to pick it up on this. Take my word for it. It is just a little on the wobbly side. It's not as tight. Now, OEM for this, there's 4 different OEM providers for this. One of them is GAF. That is the cheapest one. This water pump on eBay, a GAF OEM water pump was, I think, like $68. The rest of this was actually not that expensive. Now, as far as parts goes, and you want to know what parts I got, so this is the parts list in Excel I put together after getting everything apart. All the kits I could find either had parts that I did not need or that were inferior in some way. All in all, this entire parts list cost me about $1,000 after shipping and taxing, compared to the outrageous marked up parts that were either in the same condition or worse. Here are a few things to know after I went as far as I could go down the rabbit hole to find some answers that no one else had. The timing chain is a $350 part OEM from Porsche. However, that OEM part is an IWIS chain that is stamped with a J instead of an I, so it says JWIS on the chain. This is the part that was in the 955 engine from the factory, and the part without the Porsche box is $94. For the most part, everything was relatively close in cost when I went to trusted names or OEM parts. But in the end, I was able to take my total bill for these parts from $1,680 down to the $1,034 before finding the right parts for the right price. Parting these out separately is definitely the way to go. Another thing is that don't buy the coolant hoses off of eBay, even if they say they're OEM. I definitely didn't get an OEM hose, and it ended up needing to be replaced very soon afterwards. Anyways, I went with OEM from the dealership, and they clear difference in quality. And same for the O-rings on the oil cooler and other things. Get the O-rings from the dealership, even using the correct O-rings in size from an O-ring kit that I have. They're not the same. It's almost impossible to put some of these parts together, which you'll see later on, with standard O-rings versus the O-rings from Porsche. I don't know why, but trust me, learn from my mistakes. Are these O-rings? Okay. You're going to want to replace the valve cover gaskets, and you're going to want to replace any O-ring that you get to, like the O-ring for the dipstick and the O-ring for the AC. Okay, replace these O-rings, put a little page oil on there and replace them. This is the process that I'm doing because I want to save money, and I don't like paying for things that aren't necessary to make it run. And quite honestly, the amount of work that I've gotten to get to this point was not that terribly difficult. Took me, if I did this again, it'd probably take me one day to get to this point. The majority of the work is going to be disconnecting this stuff, taking these valve covers off. Everything else goes pretty quick. All right, well, that's what I'm replacing here, and I don't know really what else to say other than, just replace what you see is obviously bad. In this one, I'm not even replacing the coolant. I'm going to change out the coolant. This coolant was well within service life. I think we're halfway through the service on a coolant flush that was done a couple years on this thing. So, you can just take a bucket, put a couple rags over it, like t-shirts and towels, and pour it through and let it drain, and then you have clean coolant. As long as you didn't fill it with brake fluid or other stuff that'll mix with it, then it'll probably be fine. That's what I've always done. There's never been a problem. I will do a flush later on. I'm going to do a flush on the brakes and the power steering on this one because it is time to do it. Other than that, let's get to it. Let's get working. So what I did here is just use the drill bit to clean out the rust. I didn't actually drill those holes. I did drill a hole in a piece of flat stock, put the pin in that, and then marked a spot on it around the harmonic balancer here to drill another hole so it would rest against both the socket on the bolt and the alternator bracket there. It's worked really great. So what you're going to see me use here is a torque multiplier. If you don't have one, you're going to need one. There's no way you're getting this thing torqued down properly because it's a very high torque setting, and then I think a quarter or a third of a turn past that, you'll see that later. As for the 90-degree out issue on the engine, at this point in the process, I realized the issue. I made part one about a month after this was back up and running. What I ended up doing was taking the spark plugs out and rotating the crank counterclockwise for about a quarter turn. This pulled the pistons away from the head enough that I was able to rotate the cams 90 degrees so that the cam lockout slots were aligned correctly. They only lock out in one way. Rotating the crank backwards right now is no big deal because you're redoing the timing anyways. Besides, I installed the timing chain tensioner, and if you have the spark plugs out, it'll rotate backwards just fine. You're not going to skip around. You just tighten up the chain before you go to do the timing. So I want to say this right now. Judge me as you must for not using the right tools. You'll see me using a cheap adjustable wrench to hold the cam sprocket bolts as I tighten them to spec. They are a torque to yield bolt, but write-up says to use the bolts because, well, you can't get them. And I forget how much you have to turn them past after you torque them. I think it's like a quarter turn. It's kind of a high torque number, so it's been a year and the car hasn't had any problems. So yeah. Here's the trick on this guy, all right? So I've already got the AC manifold plug back, bolted back together. And how did I get this guy back on? You have to put the rebar on with the radiator pulled out a little bit, and should be able to clip this on and then slide the whole assembly together. Now the trick is, how do you get this guy on here? Just reach under here with the washers and everything, put it on, and once you get it started, it's kind of a pain in the butt to get started. But I just got the clip started, and I'm going to put it together, and that is how you reinstall this side. This side's easy, because it's already together, you just drop it in. So, that answers that question. Alright. Thank you to everyone who waited this long and got to the end with me. When I got it warmed up, the deviation from bank 1 and 2 was 0. 0 on bank 1 and 0 on bank 2, smack dang right in the middle. It's been about 1.5 years right now, and we put about 6,000 miles on her with no issues other than some common things like, the coolant tank exploding. I'll do a video on that soon, but for right now, I'm going to leave you with a sound of success. She fired right up on the first try. And by the way, that tapping sound is not a bore or a valve issue. It went away when I fixed a vacuum leak. Take care.